Well, welcome to Foiling Week 2021. We are pre-recording this episode, and there are some live episodes, pre-recorded episodes, and we are still in a little bit of the effects of the pandemic with people chiming in from around the world. But that's the direction Foiling Week is going. We want to get as many people involved as possible. And so, without further ado, I am your host, Chris Museler. I'm reporting today from Jamestown, Rhode Island. My co-host is Andrew Pindar, who will be in Lake Garda for the rest of Foiling Week 2021. And our guests today are going to be talking about the most recent America's Cup and talking about future America's Cups and the impact that hydrofoiling has had on the Cup itself for the past 3 editions in terms of impact, sailors, impact on sponsorship, impact on the sport. And then also just how darn hard it is to run one of these events and the challenges that the hydrofoiling monohulls are presenting on the Cup itself, on budgets, on race management. So we're going to cover a whole range of issues about this. And with us right now are the current holders of the Cup, along with Team New Zealand. So we have Aaron Young, Commodore of the Royal New Zealand Yacht Club. Hi, Aaron.
Chris, thanks for having me.
No problem. And then we have Bertie Bickett, Robert Bertie Bickett, representing the Royal Yacht Squadron, I believe. Bertie, tell us your actual title.
Well, I'm chairman of Royal Yacht Squadron Limited, which is the challenging entity as the challenger of record, and I'm also Rear Commodore of the Royal Yacht Squadron.
Awesome. Rear Commodore, just for those who aren't aware of how yacht clubs work, are you going to be the next Commodore?
No. It's the short answer. It doesn't. We don't work that way because actually we rotate in a staggered sequence. And no, one doesn't lead to the other.
Okay, gotcha. Cool. Well, good luck with that. Great. So we're going to get started. As we've done in the past, in the fall, when we had like a fully pandemic Gurit forum, Andrew has a lot of experience. I don't think it's because of his white hair. It's just because of his involvement with Pindar and sponsorship of the sport, particularly promoting women in the sport through offshore sailing and ocean sailing and other aspects of the sport. But Andrew, from your perspective as a former sponsor and even current sponsor of racing, this last America's Cup was, like we were talking to Aaron before, it's crazy, right? You know, what it produces every year, we don't know what we're going to see. We had a year without barely any racing, and then comes December and it's full on, and the racing was fantastic. What was your impression of this last America's Cup?
Well, I think like most people, I was delighted by how exciting it proved to be. I think from a sponsor's point of view, and perhaps just as a spectator's point of view, I would always prefer to see more time on the water with the boats, and I don't think that any of the premium, well, the 2 premiums of the America's Cup and Sail GP really allow us as spectators to see as much as we might like to, but maybe that's holding back bit is part of the allure. But certainly for me, it was a fantastic edition of the America's Cup, and we talked before the show, I think, there, Chris, about how it manages to morph itself every time into something that actually causes the public to have great interest. And if you've got public having interest, then you're likely to have a sponsor having interest.
Awesome. And the one thing that I forgot to mention at the beginning of this, and this is kind of how we pitch it from Foiling Week, is not only is this the, probably most eyeballs on any sailing event in the world, even more than the Olympics usually, although the Olympics, when it's put on NBC, a lot of people get to see it. It's certainly the largest hydrofoiling event on the planet. For Foiling Week, it's a big deal. And for you all, it's, it's what you're focused on. It's the most important thing in your lives right now. And Bertie from the Royal Yacht Squadron, just to clarify this, I think you guys are the challenger of record from the Royal Yacht Squadron.
That's correct.
That's the official term. And so, Aaron, from your perspective, I mean, we'll dig deeper into the regatta, but what surprised you about this Cup cycle? You did everything you could with Team New Zealand to prepare an event for a class that you've never seen race before, but what surprised you the most?
Well, I think going back, there were plenty of challenges. I mean, when the boats were first drawn up, no one really knew what was going to happen, how they were going to really perform, how fast they would actually be around a track. Could you sail them, let alone race them? So there was a lot of challenges from not only the sailing side, but also the actual race management side. I mean, we drew 5 courses in Auckland as an example, and one, as we know, has a very narrow sort of track. So, you know, you've got to consider spectator craft, safety, the ability of the boats to actually match race. And all this was pretty well unknown until December, as you mentioned. That was the first time we actually saw these boats in anger. And until then, it was very theoretical. And so it evolved a lot. The sailing got better, the racing got better, the boats got quicker. We, as a race management group, also, I suppose, got better at managing that process, the spectators, the course. So there was a lot to learn very, very quickly.
And Bertie, from the perspective of on the British side of things, I mean, I know you're part of the Royal Yacht Squadron, the limited side of things, but I mean, that leap of faith. I know the Brits put in a small foiling monohull like the Americans did and the Italians did, but I mean, how do you get buy-in for an event like this when, like Aaron says, we wound up not knowing how it was all going to work until December?
Well, that's right. I mean, it was just a huge leap of faith for all the parties. And I think the other thing to remember, we're talking about the marvels of foiling, which personally I think is absolutely the future and here to stay. But I think it's worth pointing out we were doing a sort of double challenge, because it's not just foiling; it's actually match racing foiling.
Right.
and let's not forget that element as well, because that introduces all sorts of complexities, particularly in the pre-start and in light airs as well. And I think that's what literally added a third dimension. And in some of those early Prada Cup round robin races, we had I think that first session, the first weekend, was extremely light, and actually it was all about can a boat foil or not, and how long do you spend when you rounded the weather mark, effectively going back on yourself, just trying to get the boat up on the foils, or do you just point at the target and see how you go? And in fact, in one race, I remember very well, American Magic just pointed at the target and sailed some displacement, while Luna Rossa was charging around up at the other end of the course, just trying to get up on the foils. And for those who don't know what happened, then watch the replay.
Yeah, and I think for sailors, that's not even though foiling boats, when they go in displacement mode, are like crazy slow. For sailors, we understand what it's like to inch along in light airs. But for sponsors and for non-sailors, it's kind of confusing. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about with these challenges is that in 2017, at least they had 2013 to look at with hydrofoiling catamarans and people understanding, how things work. Andrew, you're a sponsor, and you understand what it looks like to try to, someone pitching you something. But for Aaron and Bertie, did you guys ever have people involved in supporting both of your programs and both of your clubs that just like really pushed back on the idea of being involved in the America's Cup? This last one?
I'll let Aaron go first on
that. Chris, tricky one, really. If 12, I guess, when big boat foiling almost came around by accident, and all of a sudden 2013 America's Cup, boats started foiling, and then it became the norm pretty quickly. So it became pretty exciting, and it probably took a whole bunch of new people on board with it at the same time, and I guess also probably lost a couple of people at the other end.
Right.
But here in New Zealand, we're a pretty sailing friendly nation, and we got in behind what was happening, and I think to try and grow the sport in general, you need to keep evolving, and if that, in this case it's foiling, and it's exciting for the average person who might not necessarily sail. That's a positive thing for the sport, and I think we're all ultimately here to try and help the sport and help the sport grow and become more, give it more profile, and people like Andrew can continue to sponsor.
And Bertie, from your side of things, the question was, did your club get a lot of pushback for its involvement? I know, through my involvement with New York Yacht Club, there's an awful lot of support for the previous campaign and the campaigns going forward, but there's also a lot of pushback.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you represent an institution that's 207 years old, there's a greater likelihood that that there is going to be resistance to the traditional, whatever that might mean. But I think one of the fundamental tenets of the America's Cup is that it's an aspirational event. It's the aspirational end of the sport, and there's no huge secret, because it was pretty widely broadcast, that there were a wide range of people all over the world who were very skeptical about the continuation of foiling in the America's Cup, and their perfectly valid and fair arguments were that it was taking the sport so far away that it was unrelatable to the average sailor, and that was something that I was equally outspoken in disagreeing with, and Aaron likewise, and certainly for me, I live on the south coast of England. I'm fortunate enough to be able to look out of my kitchen window and see every weekend, and actually most days of the week at this time of the year, literally hundreds of dinghies out there, and believe me, more and more of them have clean air between the bottom of their boats and the top of the water. And you look at the explosion in certainly the Wasp class in Lymington, which is where I live, and then you scale it up and you look at the Mochas, and you look at the Volvo Ocean Race, and I mean, who's to disagree that this isn't here to stay?
Yeah, and you just had your UK Nationals. I saw the report yesterday. So in the Wasp class.
Yeah, so actually, if you want to attract new blood into the America's Cup, and therefore money into the America's Cup, because it's money that makes it happen, then it's got to be current, it's got to be cutting edge, it's got to be evolutionary, and the America's Cup has always been that. And I'm sure that there were howls of objection when the J class was dropped, and dismay when the meter class was dropped, and bewilderment when we went to multi-hulls. But that's now all history, and we call that old style. So right. What's new today is old tomorrow.
Awesome. And so what I wanted to ask Andrew on this kind of big picture side of things, it is one thing when you go from a J class to a meter class to an IACC, or 12 meter. But these have been, pretty massive leaps since 2013 and right before that with the multi-hulls. And it seems to me that, like Aaron was kind of pointing to, the technology, in terms of getting a boat up and flying, and then the America's Cup, and we'll get to this later, leading, the advances in the sport. Because for a while, we didn't think America's Cup was leading technological advances anymore, in some of the boats. And now it certainly is. I mean, all the hydrofoiling classes in the world right now, besides the Moth, are here because of the 2013 America's Cup. But Andrew, is it okay to have an event for the sport, and we're talking about sponsors as well, that is, even though they have Wasps and small boats, the foiling monohulls from this last America's Cup are way out there. Is it okay to have an event that still doesn't look like the majority of sailing?
Well, given that we all compare, we don't all, but a lot of people compare premium sailing with the Formula One, then my road car is rather different to a Formula One car. So
right, okay.
I just don't think we should even try to go down that path, because they are very different things. And I think that back to sponsorship, I think that clearly, well, looking at the financial model that works in New Zealand, it's somewhat different it's somewhat different because it still requires some facets of this. But we're talking about commercial sponsorship, and we're talking about essentially patronage by wealthy patrons who wish to do something within their lives, where they've got enough financial muscle to be able to participate within this world's oldest trophy stuff. So I think that we've got to differentiate between what is commercially viable sponsorship, which is to do with a return on somebody's investment and what they're trying to position themselves with, versus whether you happen to have 2 or 3 billionaires who wish to, within their lifetime, try and put their name on the America's Cup. I think that they work well with each other because they always have worked well within the America's Cup, but they are different things. And the New Zealand model, perhaps if I'm wrong on this, Aaron, but I know you have some wealthy people who will put money into the program over the years, and there's that gang of whatever they're called, the recently retired Stephen Tindall and others who have been very supportive of the Kiwi campaigns. But you haven't had the same person prepared to put in 40, 50 or whatever more million as an individual lump. So I think that New Zealand is somewhat different. And I think you also need to stand back from it and then think about the commerciality. As much as New Zealand for the America's Cup was a great success, then part of the future is how do we get commercial investment within something like this if we're going to maintain the premium status of the Cup? And that's the current debate that's going on as to, is it okay for the Cup to leave the shores of the island of the Long White Cloud? Is that contravening the original ethos of the Cup, or is that just fine? Because when we've been to Valencia and when we've been to Bermuda, it's well and truly established that that's what can happen. So I think that it's a different group of dynamics and a different discussion, really, Chris, as to what we need to look at here, because it needs to appeal to both the billionaire and also to the commercial sponsor.
Awesome. And, you brought up the idea of what, Aaron's going through right now and Bertie in terms of where the America's Cup is going to be hosted. I'm not going to grill you yet on that, but let's do two things. Let's talk about the response from this last Cup, meaning the amount of people that were interested in it, some of those numbers. I mean, obviously we were in a pandemic, just like the Vendée Globe, people were in their houses and the event was designed to be streamed on our computers. And then the second half of that question will be, because of all that new interest and because of the way the technology was able to present the sport, are we able to get away from large individual donors and get into more commercially viable, which Team New Zealand has been trying to teach us? So the first question was, what was the response from this last Cup? I mean, I know what my response was, and people in the United States, it was fantastic, and the viewing was, fascinating. So Aaron, what response did you get after this Cup?
Look, I thought from where we sat, and we were lucky enough to, be, experiencing it. It was a great event, and we all know it was only allowed to be probably half the event that it was.
Right.
But it was absolutely superb. It put that not only the America's Cup on show, it put the country on show. It was probably the biggest event of the period, because there was just nothing else much happening in the world.
Yeah.
So it was, the New Zealand public got well behind it. The Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron Club members and everybody else got right behind it. And that's the challenge for us moving forward, is that the New Zealand as a whole is a pretty educated country, I guess, when it comes to sailing and boating. And none of us live particularly far from the water, so right. to have to look at potential overseas options might sound a little bit odd, but that's commercial reality, as Andrew alluded to.
Yeah. And how about you, Bertie? I mean, the more I pay attention to sailing in the UK, which I have for a while, and followed Ben Ainsley's career and other sailors there, I realize that England seems like a smaller and smaller nation to me, only because I notice how much buy-in and investment the country has into its sailing programs. So how much interest did this last America's Cup produce in the UK for the America's Cup and the AC 75s?
Well, I think you need to kind of look at that as in two halves. The interest from those that are sailors themselves or follow sailing and those that aren't. So on the former, well, look, however many races I was fortunate enough to be out in Auckland for the duration. So I was there for about 3 months, and each day racing in Auckland was starting at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which was sort of 3 a.m. in the UK. And just judging by those that viewed it live, and certainly from my own perspective, those that were making incessant phone calls at 3:15 in the morning, some of whom I suspect had just woken up, others I'm damn sure hadn't yet been to bed. It just is in itself, I think, a commendation of how closely it was followed. I mean, there aren't many sporting events that for week after week after week, such a huge chunk of people are staggering into work, or of course not into work because they're in lockdown, so staggering down to their first Zoom call with sort of bleary-eyed, having been up all night watching the America's Cup. So in terms of viewing, to those sort of of interest anyway, absolutely phenomenal. As we progressed through the Cup, there was more and more sort of national interest being taken, of course, naturally, as you would expect. But it's a tough call to get sailing into the national news headlines. It always has been.
Right.
But one thing the Brits are good at, as indeed are our friends in New Zealand, are getting behind when they think there's a glimmer of hope that we're going to go all the way, then in they come. Shame we didn't get a little bit further, but that's left some unfinished business on the table, which is why we're back.
Right, and this particular cup, you can say, that I was a little bit internally a little bit critical of the worry for having such a truncated series. I mean, everyone did the best with what they had, but because there was no comparative racing before December, everyone was going through that cycle in December and even all the way through to the end of the cup. But it does seem to me that the cup development is always right to the end anyway. And it really was fantastic. Like you said, that glimmer of hope, every single team had a glimmer of hope moment, going through the event. So they would rise and then someone else would leapfrog them. And it was like, oh my God, now this team is the leader, So my question, going back to the AC 75 class, and we'll dissect that class with a bunch of awesome people, with Guillaume Verdier and Francesco Bruni and Elise Beavis from Team New Zealand in a couple days. But how important do you all think foiling is to the America's Cup right now? Do you think if there was not a foiling class, if it was the 72-foot maxis or something like, the fastest in the water monohull, how important do you think foiling is to the America's Cup right now?
Who wants to take that? I'll start, shall I?
Yeah.
Well, I guess, we
is it essential?
We think it is right now. We think that it's the way forward for the America's Cup. We see the development. This class is in its first cycle.
Right.
So there's a long, long way to go. And none of us understand the full potential, where it's going, what the smaller developments, what the bigger developments will be. There's a lot more to come, which we probably don't even understand yet.
Right.
And again, for the sport to grow, it probably has to, the America's Cup's always been the pinnacle. It's always been the top of, Everest, and it's got to sit somewhere near the top, and game of innovation and design and breakthroughs and new ideas and all those things. That's what makes the America's Cup. It's not a one design Olympic class. It's, some people may not like that, but.
No, I'm with you. And Bertie, the British in the past have been a little critical of the decisions on hydrofoiling. And then of course, now you're all in, and Ben Ainsley and his team and all these awesome British sailors, guys and girls, are really excelling at hydrofoiling. So, I mean, do you fully agree what Aaron's saying about this, the America's Cup being the pinnacle, and hydrofoiling just being a necessity for it to be, part of the cup?
Well, firstly, I mean, I completely agree with what Aaron says, and I'd actually slightly argue that we were sceptical about foiling. Actually, we've been 100% positive about it really all the way through. Yeah. I also agree entirely with Andrew's comments earlier about the cup being look, the cup is driven by funding. It's an extremely expensive event. And that money's got to come from somewhere, and you can't just rely on individual patronage, and you similarly can't just rely on corporate sponsorship. It needs to be a combination of the two. But I really struggle to see how, and if you'll excuse the double negative coming up, how not having advanced cutting edge technology in your sport is going to make it easier to find sponsorship. But if I may, in slightly plainer, simpler English, if you need the money, it needs to be exciting, because that makes it viewable, that makes it marketable, that makes it successful. It's also very good racing.
Well, you bring up an awesome point. In our universe, which seems small and seems big sometimes, of the sailing community around the world, the global sailing community, it's easy for us to hear a lot of feedback, for lack of a better word, that counters those ideas. But it seems to me that there's a much larger community than our sailing community that matters in terms of sustaining sponsorship and keeping these events going. Like, how many billionaires do we have in the wings ready to do help America's Cup campaigns along? So that's kind of the first time someone's ever put it to me that way, that it needs to be exciting, and it's not all about traditional sailing. It's about moving that forward.
Chris, I think on the commerciality side of it, one of the lessons that that Mark Turner attempted to take into the Volvo Ocean Race was the importance of frequency, and that if you're trying to get something on an uncertain future, that's very hard to sell sponsorship against.
Right.
It's not so hard to find your billionaire against an uncertain future, because they tend to be entrepreneurs who are used to living in that sort of world. Right. But having, so here's the paradox that exists. I think one of the many that will exist around the America's Cup. But the more events you have, and certainly a World Series, to me, is an important part of engaging within a global audience. And that gives money back to, and value back to sponsors. It's not just about whether you're getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, which bluntly is a problem for a big part of the world population to be able to watch something going on in Auckland. But if you have a World Series, you've got a problem with that, in that it's going to increase your costs by what, 5 million events per World Series event, I should think, that sort of thing. And also you're not giving the teams the same opportunity to be able to develop their boats. So they will argue that they want to have all the time for development, and not be having the time, especially if you're at a distance, to having to go into a world event because you're needing to ship or fly your team and your boats there. So there is a paradox that exists. But for me, I think there's something to be talked about here, and perhaps it's relevant. I don't know if you're going to go down this path anyway, Chris, but to talk about the pathways and the things that are important to getting popular appeal, and to get buy-in across the world. And with other sailing things, besides the frequency and the having a potential for a World Series, and so more than just one center of an event, it's how are we going to engage with other things that are important in the world today. So youth, and the Youth America's Cup, to me, has been an afterthought which needs to be put as a forethought. The participation of women, are we going to pay lip service to that, or do we believe in it? And if we believe in it, is there a role on these boats that can be designed in that is going to fit within the physique of, clearly they've got the mental ability, but the physique of a female. So I think we've got to think about are we going to address these things, or is it going to be an anachronism to where society is going? Or would you say, well, hang on, the Euro football competition is going, European Championships are going on at the minute, And with the Euros, that is an all-male event. So you have to accept the fact that it's all-male football or all-female football. So the world of sailing hasn't sorted itself out yet as to what it's doing about pathways for women, what it's doing about sustainability, and what it's doing about engagement of youth. And clearly in New Zealand, you'll be aware of it, but one of the reasons why New Zealand dominates the world of sailing disproportionately is because of the quality of the match racing programs and the other programs coming out of the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron. So I've thrown a lot on the table there, but I think that we need to be addressing some of those issues if we're really going to talk about what the America's Cup for 37 and 38 is really going to look like.
Right. So a lot to unpack there. And but I'm glad you brought it up.
We could be here all day, Chris, with Andrew's comment like that.
I know, but that's okay.
There's a lot to get through.
Yeah, but that's okay. So we've got about 10 minutes left. And so what I would like to say is, let me see. Okay, cool. So there are two big parts of that. And one part is youth and gender. And the other part is, issues like sustainability. So the organizers and the challengers all have enough on just to even run the event. But what Andrew's talking about speaks to what events need to do to be able to sustain and keep sponsorship, right? So it's something that needs to be addressed. I know this last Cup, to create a Youth World Series in the middle of a pandemic, to create initiatives for and pathways for gender, more gender diversity and equity is a lot. So let's spend the last like 5 to 10 minutes talking about what in the discussions between Royal New Zealand and the Royal Yacht Squadron and other potential challengers, where does female participation, youth participation pathways, and sustainability fit in? I know it's hard to squeeze it in, but where is that in the discussion?
Well, look, we are in still early days. It is only, I think, 94, 95 days since the end of the Cup. So it's a little premature for us to speak in too much detail, but I can absolutely assure you that Aaron and I have very regular conversations. In fact, we were having a conversation about Youth America's Cup only, I think, 2 days ago. There's a lot of moving parts right now circulating, as most people are aware. We're making some great headway on planning for AC37, but there are still a number of unknowns, but it's definitely on the agenda.
Awesome. And Aaron, so again, youth and female participation and sustainability. You can throw them all in there.
No, look, I agree with Bertie. I mean, as Bertie's mentioned, those three keep up pretty regularly, and they are genuine, pieces that we need to work on. Last time, if you remember, 2020 or 2021, we were going to have a Youth America's Cup. We were all set. As Andrew said, that has traditionally been an afterthought, and that's true. Our goal this time is that becomes part of the America's Cup. So with the America's Cup comes a Youth America's Cup as part and parcel of said event, whatever that might look like. And I don't think anyone could argue with that going into the future at, AC 45 or whatever it is, or, so I think Youth America's Cup is a must. We also had in this edition of the Youth America's Cup was proposed 2 female, 2 male. Mm-hmm. And we felt that was, a really good way to not only encourage female and male participation together, but also to bring the sport to those countries who weren't quite ready for an America's Cup challenge, because that comes with growing the sport. And what we're considering this time with the Royal Yacht Squadron is an emerging nations type situation where we're encouraging those maybe not so traditional sailing countries to be involved. So absolutely, gender is important. And with the sustainability thing, I mean, that it is a tricky one. Let's be frank. But it's probably more around looking after the ocean and our playground, as we call it, that we sail in as much as let's not focus on the detail of a boat that's not raced that many times.
Right.
Let's look at the actual environment and what we can do as an event to help the actual our own playground that we all love.
Right, and using that attention that you get to that using that platform to present those ideas. Cool. And so I'm going to start to wrap this up. And Aaron, I told you before we started, and Bertie, I'll tell you now, we do like to learn a little bit about our participants. This is about wind sports most of the time. Bertie, what have you been out on the water recently? And are you a dyed-in-the-wool sailor, or did you come to the sport late?
No, I came to the sport very early, and clearly that is a rigged question because I've been waiting to get out on my new boat since I got back from Auckland. Unfortunately, the mast which exited Auckland about a month before I did only arrived in the UK about 72 hours ago. So I finally just got out on my new build IRC boat.
Cool.
But yeah, I mean, I've been through dinghies, keelboats, spent about 10 years in the TP52 class, and then in the newly formed Fast 40 plus class here in the UK. So yeah, been around a bit.
Awesome. And how about you, Aaron? I mean, we talked, none of us are super old here, but we talked about you being 48 years old and being the Commodore, which is a hard thing to do. And any one of you're kind of volunteering. But what's your background in the sport? Did you go through the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron racing program or sailing program? And when are you sailing next?
Well, I was sort of born into sailing, whether I like it or not. My grandfather was a boat designer, famous New Zealand boat designer, boat builder. So I guess I got through into the sport, whether I liked it or not. Sailed dinghies competitively all the way through, a lot of keel boats. And currently campaign a Melges 40. So we've got a pretty strong 40-foot division in Auckland. Good fun, good sailing conditions, good fleet. Bar's good afterwards, so usual sailing stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. I mean, obviously, like Aaron said, we can be here all day and beyond talking about these things. I know you're working on them. I know the America's Cup is the largest foiling and sailing event on the planet right now. The last cup turned out to be amazing with all of its challenges, and sailing is not a perfect sport. So I applaud you all for investing the time into something that we all look up to, and it changes the sport. Andrew, last words, foiling America's Cup.
No, the last word would be fantastic with the work you're doing, and it's great to have so much commitment between the Royal New Zealand Squadron and the squadron, and the more that you can collaborate and see if you can come to a great answer, then we will all look forward to the future of the America's Cup for AC37.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been fantastic. The end of this session of the Gurit Forum Foiling Week 2021 on the last America's Cup and looking to the future. Thank you, Bertie. Thank you, Aaron. And thank you, Andrew. This is great. And we're going to have a lot more topics going forward as the week goes on.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you very much. Thanks, Andrew.